They've perfected the art of seeming open while revealing nothing. They can have an entire conversation, answer every question, share appropriate opinions, and walk away having told someone absolutely nothing real. People think they know them, but they don't. They know the performance. And the performance is so convincing that even they sometimes forget where it ends and they begin. Here's the strange part. They're not even lying. They're just omitting, strategically, constantly, to the point where the gap between what they think and what they say has become so wide they've stopped noticing it's there. So let's talk about what's actually happening when someone keeps their real thoughts private. Because this isn't about shyness, and it's not about having nothing to say. Here's what most people miss. This started as risk management. At some point, maybe early, maybe later, they learned that their unfiltered thoughts created problems. Not always, not with everyone, but enough times that a pattern formed in their brain. Speak freely, deal with consequences. Stay quiet, stay safe. Maybe they shared an honest opinion and it turned into an argument. Maybe they expressed excitement about something and got dismissed. Maybe they showed vulnerability and it got used against them later. The specific incident doesn't matter. What matters is that their brain learned to calculate risk before speaking. Is this worth saying? Will this create tension? Will this person misunderstand? Will I regret this? And once that calculation becomes automatic, something shifts. They stop speaking spontaneously. Everything gets filtered. At first, it's just the controversial stuff, the opinions that might offend, the thoughts that could start arguments, but the filter doesn't stay narrow, it widens. Soon, they're not just filtering controversial thoughts. They're filtering everything that feels too honest, too revealing, too much. And over time, privacy stops being a strategy. It becomes a reflex. They're not consciously deciding to withhold anymore. They're just not sharing automatically. When someone spends enough time performing a version of themselves, that version starts to feel real. Not because it's fake, but because it's practiced, polished, predictable. They know how that version will be received. They know it's safe. They know it won't create problems. Meanwhile, their actual thoughts, the unfiltered ones, start to feel foreign, dangerous, like something that needs to be contained, so they develop fluency in the language of not quite lying, answering questions without really answering them, sharing just enough to seem engaged while revealing nothing that matters. People think they're mysterious or deep or hard to read, but they're not hard to read. The book just stays closed. So why keep doing this? What's the psychological payoff? Control. When their real thoughts stay private, no one can misunderstand them, dismiss them, use them against them. They stay safe. They avoid conflict. They maintain an image that works. But there's also something else. Cognitive efficiency. Once the pattern is established, breaking it requires energy. Explaining why they suddenly have opinions when they've been agreeable for years. It's easier to maintain the pattern than to disrupt it. So the filter stays, and over time, it stops feeling like a choice. But here's what the psychology research shows. This pattern has a cost. Not for everyone. Some people genuinely prefer privacy and feel no loss from it. But for many, there's a growing sense of disconnection. Not from others, from themselves. When someone constantly translates their thoughts into acceptable versions before speaking, they start to lose touch with what the unedited version even sounds like. And that creates a specific kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know them but don't. The better they get at the performance, the less people probe. At first, people ask, "What do you really think? How do you actually feel?" But when the answer is always some version of "I'm fine" or "I don't have strong feelings about it," others learn to stop asking. The brain is efficient. It stops seeking information that never comes. So people assume they don't have depth, don't have strong opinions, don't need what everyone else needs, and they don't correct that assumption. Because correcting it would require the very thing they've spent years avoiding, revealing what's actually inside. So what's really happening here psychologically? A few things. First, there's learned avoidance. Their brain has been conditioned to associate honesty with negative outcomes, so it automatically avoids it. Second, there's identity protection. The performed version feels safer than the real one, so the brain protects it. Third, there's social prediction. They've gotten good at predicting how people will react, and that prediction happens before they speak. The filtered version is tested and approved. The real version is unknown and risky. And fourth, there's habit. The pattern has been repeated so many times it's now the default. Breaking it would require conscious effort against years of reinforcement. So here's the question. Can this pattern change? Psychologically, yes, but not through force. The brain won't suddenly trust honesty if honesty has historically been punished. If someone keeps their real thoughts private, they're not broken. They're not cold. They're not fake. They're just someone whose brain learned that privacy was safer than exposure, that filtering was smarter than honesty, that the performance had better outcomes than the reality. And maybe that was true. Maybe it still is in some contexts, but it doesn't have to be true everywhere, with everyone, forever. What would happen if they said one real thing to one safe person? Not to prove anything, not to force a breakthrough, just to see if the brain's prediction that honesty is always dangerous is still accurate. Drop a comment if this one landed, and subscribe for more if you want to understand the psychology behind why we are the way we are.